Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Azure podcast with your host Sam Foote.
And Anne Armstrong.
If you're new here, we're a pair of Azure and Microsoft 365 focused IT security professionals. It's episode 18 of season 6. Alan and I recently had a discussion talking around Azure Bastion, Microsoft's fully managed platform as a service solution designed to provide secure remote desktop protocol and secure shell protocol, or SSH, access to Azure virtual machines. Here are a few things that we covered. Why securing access to virtual machines can be a challenge. What are the core features set of Azure Bastion? The SKU options available and practical applications and best practices. We've noticed that a large number of you aren't subscribed. If you do enjoy our podcast, please do consider subscribing. It would mean a lot to us for you to show your support to the show. It's a really great episode, so let's get started. Hey Alan, how are you doing?
Hey Sam, not doing too bad. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. Any exciting news that you've got to share?
I suppose it's small, exciting. Bit of news. I've managed to be recognised for another year as an MVP.
Woo! If I had some way to do some sort of effect or something like that, I'd do it. Clap, clap, clap! Congratulations.
Thanks.
Was that a nervous wait?
Yeah. Well, we do. I believe I had done enough, but you never know. It's not like I thought, oh, I've not done enough, sort of thing. But I thought, with the podcast and stuff, I thought I, nailed it. But you never know. So, yeah, it's you submit your evidence and in submission for renewal in end of March, and then you've got to wait till X week in July to find out. So yeah. It's like, and you start seeing on your, your security MVP chats with all the others saying, I've got the email, I'm in. And I'm like, where's my email? So, it turned up, so it's good. But you do have a question at that point when everyone's spamming the group chat sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone's like, oh, what's going on? Because what's the time between submitting your, I don't know, is it evidence? That's what they call it, or renewal or something like that, till you actually finding out? What's the sort of time?
Yeah, it's like 3 to 4 months wait sort of thing. So okay. Yeah, you do your evidence and stuff, and then you're like, cool, I've done it, and then you hear nothing. And then you find out that, it's what date it's going to be, or you find out because everyone's going, oh, has anyone got any emails yet? And you start going, oh, yeah, it's today.
Yeah.
Cool.
Nice. No, that's really cool. No, well done. Yeah, that's really good news.
Yeah, I got my disc. That came quite quick to go on my award.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Managed to get a few bits from the store as well, whilst the delivery was free. So
nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
How about you? Anything in the news or anything like that? I don't think there's been too much as there.
Not I've really been aware of. Not much on product side, I don't think, that I'm aware of.
No, the only thing I seen the other day was that Co-op has admitted to data being leaked now from their attack.
Okay, yeah. I saw they'd made some arrests.
Yeah, there was something like that as well, wasn't there? Yeah.
Yeah, if I remember right, it was quite like a young group of people potentially, but obviously until, anything's been concluded, I suppose it's all conjecture at this point, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I think that's probably the only thing I've heard.
Nice. Right, should we get on with this week's episode?
Yep. So what is it then, Sam?
I'm going to cover Azure Bastion this week.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is quite. I think it's quite amazing that we've got to this point without mentioning Azure Bastion. To be totally honest with you, because I could have swore we would have done it before, but obviously not.
I think we've probably mentioned it in episodes because it's kind of like a core back-end feature sort of thing that's now part of the, I'm going to say part of the furniture, really, kind of stuff. Things like we've missed the other stuff, haven't we? I think where we just not taking it for granted, but it's just day to day. It's not something else. So
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
okay, so I guess to start off with, um, how do we, or can we, can we start with securing access to virtual machines? Why is that important?
Yeah, okay, yeah. So, um, yeah, the basic concept that we're aiming to try to secure and to make more secure is essentially typically administrative and remote access to virtual machines. So, imagine previously you were like fully on prem and you wanted to, use like remote desktop as an example into a virtual machine that was in, a data center across the hallway, right? You'd typically have, direct line of sight or some sort of VLAN peer in order to actually access that machine, right? But it's all within inside of your, your fortress and your organization. Um, and then you would have, like say maybe like a VPN solution as an example to, to punch a hole into your on-premise network if you were say working remotely, to then get line of sight to a machine. And and what we've done with modern workloads and virtual machines is we've essentially shifted those into the cloud, or we've got new types of workloads that are working in the cloud in a hybrid like type configuration. Now, if you do have some sort of VPN peering solution into Azure, you can still have that level of private access into Azure. But for more, I'm not going to call them more simplistic type setups, but let's say you've just got a bank of virtual machines running in Azure. You don't have that peering in place. How do you securely connect to those machines? If you want to use something like remote desktop, do you give that virtual machine, a public IP address? Do you modify its firewall rules in order to, gain access to it remotely? And there are ways to have, just-in-time access to machines and to, harden, firewall rules in a way that does limit access. You could say something like, only open like the RDP port to a certain, IP address range. That's not foolproof, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more depth. But there are certain ways to, limit the scope of access, in quite a basic way. But what if you've got a workload that you don't want to give a public IP address to? Maybe it's a highly sensitive set of virtual machines and workloads that should only live in private like networking space. And again, we can look to fire up like a VPN, like a peering type or technology. You might be able to install some sort of like remote access software to punch out from the virtual machine. But that might require client installs, third-party software potentially. So really, making sure that remote access connectivity, there are a few different things that you need to be aware of there, that I've just discussed. And what we do see time and time again, unfortunately, is that there are numbers, thousands or even hundreds of thousands of machines that are out there that have been temporarily opened up to the internet for remote access, or they've been misconfigured via a template or similar, and I believe the visibility is sort of detached in the cloud environment. Whereas, when these types of systems were originally built like on-prem, I felt like people really understood their network perimeter. And I'm not saying that organizations don't understand their network perimeter in the cloud, but it's a lot easier to break through that network perimeter in the cloud. Somebody that is an owner in Azure can say, hey, I want to assign this public IP address to this virtual machine, make these changes, in software relatively quickly, and that's great for productivity. But it can open up, you up to potential issues. And so it can be a struggle to work out how to set up that effectively. Also, a lot of these systems don't have what we call like conditional access type um, policies and authentication flows. And when we talk about conditional access, we're thinking about sign in and user risk telemetry. So every time somebody attempts to authenticate against a resource, we are checking the device that they're connecting from. We're checking the location that they're connecting from. We're looking at the telemetry around their interactions with the cloud system to understand, to look for those anomalies, to say, hey, we think actually this user interaction is risky. And a lot of traditional applications and setups don't really have that level of sophistication. They maybe have like enforced guardrails, like I talked about previously, around whitelisting an IP address range and having that as a known trusted location. Now that's fine when that location is trusted, but if you're in like a breach scenario and a threat actor has access to a resource, in that IP address range, let's say like one of your machines on-prem gets compromised, then that attacker essentially could have free reign to start attacking those endpoints. So what we want is we want a system in place that is continuously evaluating that access and making sure that the up-to-date telemetry and signals are layering in that control. So I'm not saying it can't be done. It can definitely be done with third-party software controls and also a bunch of network connectivity type controls in Azure as well. But there's hopefully got to be a simpler way to do it than what I've described.
Yeah, I think you're right in that, I guess say at least a couple of years ago anyway, there was no real warnings about exposing a device to the internet. Like maybe light warnings, but when you create a new VM, it was, hey, how do you want to access it? RDP, cool, okay. It will create the rules for you. Like, it wouldn't ask you what IPs at that point, just open it up.
No, and it was default, like, create a virtual machine. You're creating a Windows VM. Oh, what's the admin username and password? And a big checkbox going, hey, do you want to really quickly access this via RDP? Yeah. We'll stick a public IP and a firewall rule in for you automatically. And I do know that secure from start, like template and the new wizard is a lot better from that perspective. You actually have to go out of your way, and it's a lot more obvious now. But I dread to think how many machines have been created, just with the next type attitude for the wizard.
Yeah, I think as well, like you said, that's one mechanism for being in that insecure state, either accidentally or intentionally, maybe, just to make it easy. The other one is if you want to do something to a machine, you do go to the machine and open up the ports. You guys say, like you said, you do it temporarily, but then it gets forgotten about if you haven't got the just-in-time stuff sort of baked in. Or the other one I've seen is because someone's IP address changes, their home address changes all the time. They keep adding more IPs to it, and then there's this mass list of this ISP that potentially could, or they just whitelist the whole range. I don't know, just to stop them having to do it. There's all these tedious things that leave stuff open, and or they just go, don't bother, and just go, yeah, any, I'll shut it down when I finish in a week's time. 6 months later, it's still open and it's been breached, or you can see all the attempts on it and stuff. So yeah,
Yeah, and
Steph, go on.
and one thing I do, I haven't really mentioned is regulation now as well. Regulation is hotting up in this area. There are controls, and rules in place which, specifically target, the secure management of administrative, ports on machines, right? So, if you are dealing with, sensitive data, or you work in a regulated industry, it's highly likely that you have specific, quality and security controls that you should adhere to. And and to go back to your point, how many times have I opened a virtual machine seeing Sam Home IP1, Sam Home IP2, Sam's Airbnb IP3, we have all done it. It is supposed to just be a temporary measure, but we are human and we want to make sure that's cleaned up, afterwards.
Yeah. Okay, so there must be a better way. So I guess, we're here to talk about Azure Bastion. So what exactly is it, and why should organizations take care about it?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, there are ways to set up, sort of, VPN gateway type integrations into Azure, and to manage all of that, private networking, in maybe a hybrid scenario. But for organizations that don't have that, or they want essentially a simpler way to get access to these machines, Azure Bastion is essentially the tool to do that. So it is a fully managed PaaS service, okay, that you provision in Azure, okay? So you decide, this is something that you have to, deploy. Sorry, my mind just went blank. I was trying to work out. So you deploy it and you configure it in Azure. But because it's a PaaS service, Microsoft completely manages it on your behalf. And what that's great. Why that's great is because you don't have to worry about any of that patching. You don't have to worry about like 0-day exploits or known vulnerabilities being discovered. They will be automatically patched. Well, I'm not saying you shouldn't worry about 0-day exploits, but they will be patched on your behalf. It's not something that you have to, manage day to day. Just like many other, Azure and cloud services. It provides the ability to connect via Remote Desktop Protocol, or RDP, and SSH as well. So it's not just a Windows. It's not just supported on Windows. You've also got the Linux SSH support there as well. You can have your RDP and SSH session directly in the Azure portal. So with a single click, you can connect to a machine from the portal. This has the really big benefit that it's a complete web-based client. We know that we can get remote connectivity to Azure, and I'll talk about that, in security in a little bit more time. But what's great is that Bastion can connect to your virtual machine via its private IP address. You do not need to create a public IP address and expose that to an external service. All of that connectivity requirements is all dealt with on the platform side. Your RDP or SSH session communicates from your client all the way through to the machine via TLS, essentially. So, from your machine to the portal via TLS. So, if you do have regulatory requirements that requires you to be on like a minimum TLS version, it supports TLS 1.2, and older TLS versions just aren't supported, and it's not something that you really need to like care about, because that HTML5 web-based client is like Microsoft's technology. You're just interacting it with it, as a user. You don't need to apply any NSGs. Azure Bastion creates its own subnet in your networking space. It handles that integration into your private networking space. If you are looking at other sort of like Bastion type or jump box technology, there is no need to have a separate a Bastion host on the actual VM or on a separate VM at all. Okay, so it's fully managed on the Azure side, not on the virtual machine side, and it connects via those standard protocols RDP and SSH. Your VMs are protected against port scanning. So you don't, if you don't wish to, you don't need to expose your VMs, to the internet to get that remote connectivity. So it is really good to be able to punch in to those, those private networking and workloads. And if you do have a public-facing virtual machine, you don't need to expose more management ports on those machines, other than your actual workload ports that you're using. And what this does is, Bastion sits, at the perimeter of your network, your virtual network. So you don't necessarily need to think about public hardening of each of your VMs in your virtual network. And I just want to talk about that because that sounds a bit scary. I'm not saying that you don't need to assign good, security baselines to your virtual machines, or, in network in network firewalls, software firewalls on the virtual machines, NSGs, etc. What I'm saying is that you don't need to think about that at the perimeter you don't need to go to the level of hardening a machine for public access just because you want to get access to it via RDP or SSH remotely. You can connect to both Linux virtual machines and Windows virtual machines with both SSH and RDP. There are some nuances around the SKUs, but I'll talk about that in a little bit more depth. You can connect to target virtual machines in peered virtual networks as well. Support for concurrent connections is in place in Bastion as well. In the standard and premium SKUs, you can do things like uploading and downloading files. You can create shareable links in order to get access. Virtual machine audio output, session recording. There's a whole host of different, features and functionality. I won't go into in depth, but what I want to make you aware of is they have thought about a lot of the different actions and features that you're going to want from a remote access solution, right? It is pretty feature rich from that perspective.
Okay, yeah, that sounds like a lot. I've seen a lot of time. I think you kind of mentioned it, that I've seen a couple of times where people, organizations have still got a jump box that you go to, and then use Bastion to get to that jump box and then jump around the network, and just trying to get the understanding that you don't need that anymore, because the Bastion is in effect that jump box. It's only if you needed, I suppose, an admin box to talk to other ports or other services, I guess, might be the only thing. But generally, you would probably jump to the box itself or SSH into that box to do what you need.
Yeah, and that's why I called out the VNet peering as well, because you can sometimes think that you've got to like double jump like across networks and things like that, right? Because you might not have like the routing in place and the NVAs in place in order to set those types of connections up, right, in that space. So it is pretty smart from that perspective. And there is a cost to Bastion, and you could make the argument that you could use quite lightweight jump boxes, right? You may not fix your core security concern of secure access to the machines, right? But you could make the argument of a basic jump box on a low SKU, but you do have to manage those endpoints. You have to license them, you have to pay for their resources, and then somebody's got to manage them because they are IaaS virtual machines, right? This is a completely PaaS hosted solution by Microsoft. It is relatively simple. I'm going to say relatively simple to set up. It's not a inherently complex architecture and integration from my perspective.
No, and then I suppose that's probably leading on to the next question around how does it work, what's the architecture like? And I'm guessing, kind of thinking about it, if you're in a hub and spoke scenario, you might have those at the hub side to then jump out to the various spokes you might have, I guess, as an option.
Yeah, I think it is worth saying that because of the way that it integrates into essentially basic Azure virtual networking, I wouldn't really say it matters too much about how you've got your sort of networking architecture set up, because you can essentially inject it into the right place that you need it. Let's talk about some of the... I will go through the different SKUs in a bit more depth, but when I'm talking about architectures, I do need to talk about the SKUs because they all slightly work in a... They work in a slightly different way. So let's first talk about Bastion Developer, which is the lowest and free tier. It's free, isn't it? Yeah, free tier of Bastion. So with Bastion Developer, all you can connect is via the Azure portal. So, the user logs into the Azure portal, they connect via, TLS, encrypted 443, and you connect to the Azure Bastion shared pool. So essentially you're on, shared Bastion hosting at that point. And then you can connect to your, target virtual machine subnet from there. So pretty simple. You still access via the Azure portal, and we'll talk about how it integrates with the Azure portal and why that's powerful. And then when you get to the basic SKU and higher, you essentially still connect to the Azure portal, but you can also connect via the native client as well, straight into Bastion as well. So you can use the native RDP and SSH client as well. Those connections are still, TLS encrypted. You're just not accessing them directly from the Azure portal. And then the connections from Bastion at that point are exactly the same as they're exactly the same into your target virtual machine subnet as well. There is also the private only deployment, which I think is only supported in the premium SKU. We'll get to SKUs and we'll talk about it in some more depth. But this is where you can connect via a private IP address directly into Azure Bastion as well via a private IP. So that is also supported as well. If you want to connect in via not having to go directly through the Azure portal as well, but I'll talk about that private only deployment in a bit more depth. There is also the ability to, in some regions, to deploy Azure Bastion in availability zones or multiple for zone redundancy as well. So if you're thinking about, having interzone redundancy, because administrative access or remote access to virtual machines is quite an important IT process. So you can set that up. It's currently in preview, but you can set it up in a lot of the major regions, I'd say. Like, it's only supported in the UK, South in the UK, West Europe, West US 2, East US, East US 2, so North Europe, those types of places, but not everywhere. You can Azure Bastion does support manual host scaling as well. So you can configure the number of host instances or scale units in order to manage the number of concurrent RDP or SSH connections that Bastion can support. So you can essentially scale that up as well. Azure Bastion supports up to 50 host instances. Crazy. So you can go up to that level at standard SKU and higher for that. I think that's all I wanted to talk about with the architecture, because it's a bit of a black box, really. You essentially, connect to it however you want to, dependent on your SKU level. You deploy it, and it sets it all up in the background for you. There's not really a huge amount to do.
No, and I guess, like you said, it connects to a VNet. Each one can connect to a single VNet, be attached to a single VNet, can't it? And then, like you said, you can then determine by peering, etc., how you can connect to other machines on the VNets, the networking in Azure.
Yeah.
And like you said, you can just attach it, or you can multiple attachments. Multiple bastions in different VNets if they're not connected, or if you want them just closer to the machines themselves, you can. Or, like you said, peering, maybe put it in the hub, so you've got all your connections coming in from the central hub, or maybe from a spoke dedicated to it. I don't know, whichever way you might want to do that. And then, you can manage then what it can communicate with, going via the firewalls, things like that. So you still have control of what it can talk to, but at the same time, it can only do RDP SSH. It's not a jump box that can do anything as well. That's probably quite clear, isn't it? As well.
Yeah, actually, that is a really good point. That it isn't a virtual machine that you can do anything with. It is just RDP or SSH.
Yeah. Cool. Okay, shall we talk about the SKUs then? The differences, what's available? You kind of mentioned them, and how do they cater for the different needs? I guess you kind of covered that a little bit, but it's worth diving in a little bit more, because I know there's some cool features in there.
Yeah. Okay. Just give me 2 seconds. So I'll just right. Yeah. Let's talk about let's start off with the basic SKU. You're essentially going to get, I want to say, like, the base functionality in the basic SKU kind of makes sense, right? But there is actually quite a lot there. So connect to target VMs in the same virtual network. Target VMs in peered virtual networks is available in the basic SKU. You can support concurrent connections in the basic SKU as well. You can access Linux virtual machine private keys in Azure Key Vault in the basic SKU as well. Connect to Linux and Windows. Linux using SSH and Windows using RDP, but you can't connect to Linux VMs via RDP or Windows VMs via SSH. Like the opposites of what you would expect. You can't do those. You can't specify custom inbound ports. But you can do Kerberos authentication with the machines on the basic SKU, and the only other feature of the basic SKU is the virtual machine audio output as well. If you bump up to the standard, I'm just going to talk about extra things you get. So you get those inverted, connection types, Linux RDP and Windows SSH. You can specify a custom inbound port. You can connect to virtual machines using the Azure CLI in standard SKU. Host scaling is available in the standard SKU. You can upload or download files in the standard SKU. Create a shareable link. So this allows you to create a link, and what that you can then do is you can send that link to somebody, and it prompts the user to sign in to the target resource via RDP or SSH. So you can create like you can create a quick shareable link, basically to others in your organization. You can connect to VMs via an IP address. You can also disable copy and paste on the web-based client in the standard SKU, because that could be really good for your sort of session control and data loss prevention. And then, if you then go up to the premium SKU, you then get there's only an extra couple of things you get, but they're quite big. Session recording, which is a relatively new feature. So, I do know that some organizations require, session recording of, like third party, third party risk management. And also, if you're connecting, like as a privileged user, to privileged resources, session recording can be really, really valuable to organizations. You create a storage account to store your recorded session, your session recordings in. And then, you've got the private only deployment as well. So this is for when you want to create, true end-to-end private connectivity. You have to connect using the native client instead. But you can use, a private IP address to connect to at that point. So if you do want that, that is supported as well on the premium tier. And I think that's. Is there anything else that I skipped over there pretty quick? I should talk about.
Got the developer one, I suppose, the free tier.
Yes. I forgot about that. Let me just see. Is the basic difference just the multi-tenant shared resources? Do you know of any other feature differences there? It's not in my table that I've got.
No, I don't think so. I think the main thing is the cost, really. So you haven't said about the cost of these.
No, I haven't. No, let's talk about cost now, actually, because that is worth talking about. So the Azure Bastion developer is actually free, that tier. But again, well, it's not completely free, because we should talk about. It's not completely free, but you are running on that shared infrastructure. Now, typically, and I'd like to know your sort of thought on this, Alan, most of the time when I've been interacting with like an organization that uses these types of secure access solutions and jump boxes, they're typically pretty security conscious and they want that sort of dedicated infrastructure. Does that make sense? Or they've got regulatory requirements that don't allow them to use, shared infrastructure.
Yeah. I think the idea of this is where maybe there isn't sensitive data being involved, and maybe it is literally, whole out, development side of things, because you can imagine a development environment maybe having separate VNets not connected together. It's designed for, tracking, not tracking, but individual development kind of thing, and you would maybe have to spin up, 1, 2, 3, 4 of them, the bastions, up to be able to, do it this way, or the alternative is, open up the, RDP connections directly to the host, and leave ports open. So I think this was sort of the in between to say, hey, actually, it's not going to cost you much to do this, but it's only for development. To give you that, here's a way of doing it. We're okay if you have like 4, 5, 6 of these, because it's not going to cost us as much, as you would for the standard one, or have to comply with our, the production staging, configuration. If that makes sense.
Yeah, you can only connect to one machine, and there's no host scaling
Yeah.
on developer. So you would have a scaling type issue, wouldn't you? It's designed for, connecting to like one machine, at
Yeah.
a time.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's to try and get away from opening ports up. It's that
Yeah,
that
yeah,
well, it's one, maybe it's 1-to-1, or one to, it is 1-to-1 to a machine, but you haven't got each machine having a public IP address and the ports being open on it.
yeah. And if you think about, like console access or serial access to a virtual
Mm.
machine, the Azure portal already supports that, doesn't it? On a single machine basis, right? You can
Yeah.
connect to its terminal effectively, like on Linux, and interact with it. You wouldn't want to, but you could, right?
Yeah.
And I suppose this is no different, really, is it? I suppose it is graphical, like as in it does support like graphical type connections, but my and the remote, oh no, it is still remote connectivity. So it's essentially just a different way to get access to that machine, right?
It's just it's reducing the barrier to entry
Yeah.
for a secure way of connecting to it without it being, firewall related.
Okay, then Azure Bastion Basic is 19 cents per hour in dollars, US dollars, and that equates to around $138 a month for Basic. So,
Okay.
is that expensive? It is when you if you were to no, okay. It is if you were to use some sort of burstable instance as a jump box, but
And it was always shut down. Yeah.
and and it was shut down, and you managed it and everything like that. So there's that. Azure Bastion Standard is 29 cents per hour, so that's $211 a month for the base standard instance. But if you require extra standard instances on top of that via scaling, they're only 14 cents per hour for the extras. So each extra one is $100 a month on top. So you do get some level of saving, I suppose, if you've got the base unit.
Yeah, it's almost like you've got the core, the connectivity service, and then the compute there, haven't you?
Yeah.
So the first one pays for all of it, and then the next one you're just paying for the extra compute kind of thing.
But it is right to say, isn't it, that this is per NSG cost and paired NSG, right? This is not per virtual machine, is it? Because you're deploying this. You're deploying this into an. Yeah.
Yeah, it's per deployment of Bastion.
Yeah.
Not
and
per jump or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and if your connectivity supports it, like let's call it a single Bastion, right? If you had a very flat, let's say you had a very flat network that wasn't complex at all, you just had like one private, virtual network with all of your, your hosted stuff in it. You're potentially looking at deploying one and then only scaling if you need more concurrent connections at that point.
Yeah, and that's kind of where I was going with the connect it to the hub.
Yeah, exactly.
Sort of thing. Yeah. Have it central. Have the one way in to the network, and then scale it up because you're going to save on the compute in theory by a bit.
Yeah,
and also the management of it.
Yeah. And then up to premium, and remember that the two additional benefits of premium are the private connectivity and screen recording. You're looking at 45 cents per hour. That's $328 a month, with each additional premium instance coming in at 22 cents per month. So quite a big discount. Well, I'll call it a discount. So each additional premium instance is only half the price of the first one at that point. So then so again, fully managed service for you. No patching, very simple configuration, I would say, compared to setting up a virtual machine with an operating system, connectivity requirements, accounts, blah blah blah, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, well, think about how would you today, apart from buying a product like something like CyberArk or something like that, and managing the machines that they run. Again, you've got to manage the host that you jump onto, if potentially there are some, I think, some cloud services now, but yeah, manage that and also manage the recording software. Keep that up to date, make sure it's working.
Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
just done.
Correct. Yeah. Like, we need session recording for these jump boxes.
Increase SKU,
Spin
done.
increase SKU, create storage account, configure. Next, please. Right. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it is. It is relatively expensive, but when you think about it, like it is concurrent connections to bastions. You might only need a handful of them, even with the most complicated network setups potentially.
Yeah. Okay. Is that all of them? SKUs.
That is sorry. Yeah, that is all the SKUs. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's cool. Yeah. It sounds expensive, but I think when you think about the management overhead that you don't have to do, the fact that you can, I guess, if you really wanted to spin them up and spin them, you could create and destroy them whenever you need. Maybe you're doing a project.
It is worth me pointing out actually, because there is a little one in the pricing table. The Azure Bastion Standard and Azure Bastion Premium start with 2 instances as part of base pricing.
Ooh, okay.
So even though basic is 19 cents per hour and then standard is 29 cents per hour, but you are getting 2 instances as part of that base pricing.
Oh, okay. So the starting price is for 2.
That's what it's saying on the pricing table. Yeah.
Okay, it's not that it starts with 2, but you're getting paid. You're being paid for 1 plus 1. That makes
Yeah.
sense.
I'm gonna just double check the pricing
But
calculator.
I was going to say that might be right if that makes sense because of the extra compute it needs to do around screen recording, things like that. I was going to say because there's going to be some extra compute there or bigger VMs from what the back end will look like.
Yeah, when I do the Azure pricing calculator, it is the same numbers that I just quoted you. You can add additional scale units on top.
Okay.
But it doesn't say either way, so your mileage may vary with that.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, well, that's quite a good deal then, really, isn't it? For the, it looked like double the price, but actually you're getting 2.
Yeah, like it doesn't force me to have 1 additional scale unit in the pricing calculator. So, the only other thing as well, you do have to pay for outbound data transfer out of the region that you're in. So
Yeah, that's only going to be RDP traffic at this point, not unless you're downloading a file, I guess. But then that's standard, isn't it, for pulling stuff out of Azure anyway?
yeah,
So
you just got to realize that you are egressing
yes,
out, aren't you?
yeah, but yeah, you can't really see that being too much on that side. But yeah, because it's normally all compressed, and if it's not like it's 4K, 120 hertz or anything like that, is it?
No, exactly. Yeah.
It's going to be fairly basic sort of data rate, data stream from that side. So
Yeah, exactly.
cool. Okay, so probably moving on because we are getting quite into this one. I guess how does Bastion integrate with other Microsoft or Azure security solutions?
Yeah, so the main one. Okay, so the main couple that I'll talk about sort of briefly is Entra ID, and that is because this product is based in the Azure portal, so you do have the massive benefit of going through conditional access, to secure that user access, and I have described that earlier in this episode. So you can layer on a load of additional protection there. You've got conditional access itself and the different policies and the context that it can give you around a user. But also you can look at things like identity protection on top of that as well, risky sign-ins, risky user activity as well. So that because you have that overarching Entra protection, you have additional protection for this this type of connectivity. I do also want to talk about logging. It does integrate into Azure Monitor and Log Analytics as well, because it is essentially just a Azure resource at this
Mm.
point as well. So, if you could also say that your monitoring capability is completely integrated as well, because you're not creating a jump box with the operating system logs and then whatever solution that you're using for remote connectivity that you're having to monitor and integrate and all of that sort of stuff. You could even force that Azure Monitor integration with Azure Policy, so you're guaranteed that it's collecting information. So just the only other thing I do just want to quickly talk about, it's not directly Azure Bastion, but just think about Defender for Cloud as well. That is where you're going to go to find out whether you do actually have insecure management of your remote access or administrative ports, right? So Defender for Cloud, even in free mode.
Defender free CSPM, isn't it?
Defender for Cloud CSPM free will give you the static analysis of the posture of these virtual machines and tell you if you do have these management ports open.
Yeah, I think the other one as well that you could do, because again, accessing those resources via the Bastion normally requires you to have a role, doesn't it, or permission in Azure anyway, is you could put PIM in front of it as well to add you to a role or add you to a group that gives you permission to access it. So again, approvals, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, just in time, RBAC, into these as well. Yeah, because a lot of this isn't used for like end user. It can be, but it's mostly administrative type activities. So, if you do need a privileged, access solution, then this sort of fits the bill quite well. Good call out on the PIM.
Yeah, I like to get PIM everywhere. GSA, etc. Right. Okay. Give us some practical use cases then for a Bastion in the real world scenarios, quickly.
Okay. Yeah. So, we've talked about all these things already, but let's just reinforce them. Secure remote access for admins. We don't want you opening these management ports out to the internet, or even just whitelisting your trusted locations. Your home IP address is not a trusted location in this context. If you do work in regulated industries, the premium SKU has that session recording. You can do full private connectivity as well. You've got that RBAC, that PIM, that conditional access that can tick a lot of regulatory compliance. Enforced use of a TLS, as an example, is a really easily demonstratable checkbox with this solution. You've got the developer SKU. So if you want to try it out and you want to access, a single virtual machine, do check that out as well, because except for the egress cost, you're not paying for the actual infrastructure itself. There is disaster recovery built into this. It does have availability zone support. You do have the backup and SLA of Microsoft's hyperscale cloud. So if you're running your own jump boxes and your own solutions, you do need to think about your disaster recovery and high availability as well. You can access these solutions globally. You could use conditional access to enforce any regional requirements that you have as well. But you can't also just rely on Bastion. You do need other networking technologies in Azure as well. So still think about your Azure firewall and network security groups to also create a layered security approach as well, because just because virtual machines are sitting side by side doesn't necessarily mean that they don't need to be protected via like firewalls and network security groups to create that layered security approach in Azure. Sorry, we've gone way over time, so that's my wrap. Anything you wanted to add onto that, Alan?
No, I think it's a great solution. Just needs you think about where to put it, test it out, prove it all works, put the protections in place for using additional access and PIM and everything.
Yeah, definitely. 100%.
Cool. Okay, next episode's going to be, we're going to revisit it in some way, but the unified SecOps platform. So Defender XDR with the integration with Sentinel. What's the differences now? Because I think when I did it last was when it was first talked about. And a lot's changed. So one announcement that Sentinel's only going to be in there as of
Alan, stop! You just got to tease it. No, but yes, you've got to actually do something now, haven't you?
Or start planning it. Yes, exactly, and also understand what the benefits are around it. Why is it good that it is in one place?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that should be a good episode. Cool. So, did you enjoy this episode? If so, please do consider leaving us a review on Apple or Spotify or YouTube. This really helps us reach out to more people like yourselves. If you do have any specific feedback or suggestions of episodes, we have a link in our show notes to get in contact with us.
Yeah, and if you've made it this far, thank you ever so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Yep, thanks all.